Greetings, everyone. This is Jackie Thornton with Leading Age Georgia and the Georgia Institute on Aging. We are delighted to have our partners from BB&T Capital Markets, and we are going to be talking about today moderately priced housing, an industry challenge. This has been one of those conversations where we've been looking at experts in the field that can guide us along this journey, where we have those that are in like the CCRC Life Plan community sector, looking at partnering with affordable housing and some federally assisted funding housing community partners to keep a moderately priced housing market in our option patterns for the future. It's really interesting, the dialogue that we're going to hear from these folks that are with BB&T. We have John Franklin, also Steve Coma, Michelle Lee, and Tom Bowden. And just so happy to have you guys, and thanks. I know that your week and last month has been really, really challenging schedules and busy, and we appreciate you joining us today. I would like to go ahead and introduce Tom, and he will get us started with this presentation.
Thanks very much, Jackie. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for being with us today. This is Tom Bowden. I'm a vice president in the Senior Living Investment Banking Group at BB&T Capital Markets, and presenting with me today are a few of my colleagues. We have John Franklin, managing director and head of our Senior Living practice here in Richmond, Virginia. We have Mr. Steve Coma, managing director and head of our housing practice located in Charlotte, North Carolina. And we have Michelle Lee, vice president and kind of jack of all trades, working closely with both the housing and senior living practices. Before we dive right in, I'd like to take a second to thank the Leading Age Georgia team, Walter, Jackie, and Susan. We really appreciate you having us today. But as has been alluded to and sitting on the title slide, Moderately Priced Housing, an Industry Challenge. As the title suggests, one of the challenges we think that this industry is going to face in the next 20 or so years is a rapid increase in demand. And I think that's something that gets a lot of attention, but what might not get quite as much attention is the specifics of how that demand will look. In particular, the demand for the affordable or middle market component. We talk a lot about the life care and $500 and $1 million entrance fee communities, but today we want to look a little bit deeper into what we'll just call the affordable portion of this market. One of the key, we have two key objectives today if you're looking on page 2. The first is to just get a better feel for this quote-unquote demand in the middle market. One of the sources we will rely heavily on was a study published by the Joint Center for Housing Studies at Harvard University. And they present some compelling statistics and arguments and projections that really support the exponentially growing need in the middle market. After we get through really drilling into the demand and where it's coming from, we want to talk about some financing sources that might help operators or developers whoever may be interested in participating in this marketplace, some different sources of capital that can help you finance depending on kind of what part of the segment you're in. That pretty much covers page 2 and page 3, so I will hand it off to Mr. John Franklin to talk about that Harvard study and some of the takeaways that it presents.
Thanks, Tom. So what is the future of senior housing? If you're looking at page 4, we do know that there will be a large increase in the elderly population, and there will be obviously a huge increase for the needs of those elderly. So what's the implication? And as Tom mentioned, there was a recent study performed by the Joint Center for Housing Studies of Harvard University that offers some insights into this. And at the end of the presentation today, we're going to also summarize some of the policy recommendations that came out of this Harvard study as well. So if you go to page 5, let's do a little bit deeper dive into some of these findings from this Harvard study. And basically what they focused on are the trends over the next 20 years. And if you look at page 5, some of these trends are pretty extraordinary. especially when you start dividing these cohorts up to 65 and older and 80 and older. So if you look at the population growth of 65 and older, that'll go up about 65% by about 31 million. But the population of 80 and over will double, going up from 12 to 24 million. And if you look at the number of households that are increasing, again, that'll be 65% increase in the number of households 65 and older. But again, when you look at the number of households that are headed by someone 80 or over, again, that'll double and will go up by about 8 million. So if you go to page 6, what does this mean? So one of the outcomes of the Harvard study, basically a key takeaway was that housing is going to be a burden. And it will not only be a burden on homeowners, but also on renters. And one of the reasons for this, there'll be more owners with mortgages due to reverse mortgages, et cetera. As a result of this, there'll also be a greater number of lower income adults, and I'll get into some of those statistics in a little bit. So going to page 7, let's talk about some of the findings regarding low income older adults. If you look at the next 20 years, the number of people that are 65 and older earning less than 80% of the median income will grow from 15 million to 27 million. That's almost double from 2015 to what's been projected in 2035. If you look at the number of 65 and older earning less than 50% of the area median income, that'll grow from 4 million to 7.6 million. Again, almost doubling, increasing by 3.6 million. But here's what's really significant. If you look at that 7.6 million that will basically qualify for housing assistance, 4.9 million who qualify will not be able to receive housing assistance. And why is that? Well, you're going to have a decline in defined benefit retirement plans. You just have sheer growth in the older population. But you also have on the supply side, there isn't going to be enough product out there because there aren't going to be enough tax credit deals. And these tax credit deals, remember, are basically government subsidies. So if the government does not create enough tax credits, that means we can't put the product out there to meet the demand. So what really is truly amazing here is that over half of the people, again, that will qualify for housing assistance will not be able to get it because there won't be enough product out there. So let's also talk about healthcare uncertainty. If you move to page 8, by 2035, the number of older households with a disability will increase by 76% and will reach over 30 million. And those disabilities lie in the areas of mobility, self-care, and household activity. Mobility being needing help with walking, getting out of bed, taking stairs. Self-care is eating, dressing, toileting, bathing. But the real increase is really going to be in needing help in household activity. Food shopping, meal prep, using the phone, taking medications, money management, driving, housework, etc. So as we can see, there is going to be a lot of need to help people with disabilities as well, and that's going to be a huge growth area. A few more statistics if you go to page 9. There was an article in Time magazine in April of 2016 that really showed some interesting social trends over the last 5 years. So what they did is basically they interviewed older adults 5 years ago and then had the same sets of interview questions today. So if you look at the result of that survey, 59% of people interviewed said that Social Security would be a major source of retirement income. That's up from 42% 5 years ago. 46% say leaving money to their heirs is important. That's down actually from 63% 5 years ago. 24% feel confident they will have enough in retirement. That's down from 37% 5 years ago. And this is really kind of interesting. So the average baby boomer goal is to have $45,000 a year in retirement income. That's their stated goal. Well, if you look at their portfolio of assets, which is basically under $150,000, that might generate about $9,000 a year in income. That's a $37,000 shortfall from what their stated goals are. So we've got a real disconnect here in terms of people's ability to pay for senior housing, et cetera, in the future. And what's really amazing is that these following stats have changed over the same time when the economy has had a steady rise in home and stock prices. So again, a huge disconnect there. And if you take this one step further, if you go to page 10, even if the average baby boomer did have $45,000 a year in retirement, look at what they can afford. I mean, the only areas that they could actually afford would be on the low end of independent living communities and residential care homes. They really can't afford AL, memory care, nursing home care, or home health aid services. Adult daycare could kick in as well. So you can kind of see a pattern here of what's going to be developing. So how can we serve this more middle or low income market, and why would we want to do this? If you go to page 11, you can do this to expand your mission, to diversify your product, to create management synergy or scale. It could be a corporate growth initiative or expand your brand. And there are several organizations that have done this in the past fairly well. Given the States, which really started out as a single-site entity in Asheville, North Carolina, acquired another what I call market-rate senior housing community about 5 years ago. But what they've also been doing during the same time frame is they've also developed some tax credit transactions where they are really reaching that more affordable market. And one of the things that Steve's going to talk about here in a minute is I think you're going to really see a growth in the rental model on the independent living side. And that's really where we're seeing a little bit of a kind of merging of what I call traditional CCRC or life plan communities and what I call multifamily. So if you go to page 12, I'm going to hand this over to Steve, and he's going to talk a little bit about affordability and what are the possible financing vehicles available. Steve?
Yeah, thanks, John. If people will flip to page 12, we have our classic Venn diagram as John just described. And we view the affordable healthcare model as being an intersection of the classic CCRC model, where entrance fees and then a monthly fee, and the multifamily model where people pay just a monthly rent, and in the healthcare industry, they'll pay an additional monthly fee for services. From our perspective, affordability really is driven by two things. One, that rental model, and then two, a structural element of the transaction or the project that has an income qualification feature associated with it. And that income feature may drive the financial technique that we use. If you turn to page 13, we list the possible financing vehicles. So many of the folks on the phone are familiar with tax-exempt bonds. They do have applicability in the affordable model, and we'll spend some time on that, a case study. Conventional bank financing, FHA/HUD. Typically, those programs do have a structural element of affordability, and we'll review those. Tax credits, again, a structural element. EB-5 financing. EB-5 financing is basically a program that foreign nationals are permitted to receive green cards by investing in projects, and healthcare facilities are a strong component of that due to the requirements associated with the EB-5 program. USDA loans, and then most folks are familiar with the Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac financing tool. If you turn to 14, what we've attempted to do is provide a continuum of affordability and then the financial products that are associated with that affordability component. So, the very low income structures where incomes are very restricted and rents are very restricted fits the FHA or HUD model. Moderate programs where income restrictions exist, but rental restrictions or restrictions on fees may or may not exist. The USDA product, and then the tax credit slash 142D product, which is that product is a classic affordable housing mechanism that's been in existence since the mid-'80s, but recently has had direct applicability to facilities from independent living, assisted living, and memory care. Middle market rental facilities, 142D, and then in combination with tax-exempt debt. And then the upper market entrance fee model, tax-exempt bonds, and bank debt. If you turn to page 15, this addresses FHA programs and what they can and cannot finance. Apartments, that's the classic use for many HUD slash FHA programs. We have those programs listed there. CCRCs, the classic CCRC, not available for FHA. Independent living, assisted living, SNF, and hospitals, all with those programs associated, listed on the right-hand column. Again, those are typically for very affordable type programs. FHA FACTS, we've highlighted just a couple in the yellow. FHA typically used by for-profit developers, and higher interest rates, they've been very popular. Even in the current interest rate, they're very popular, but the typical issue with FHA slash HUD programs is the length of time necessary to get approval. Many for-profit providers choose not to go through that very exacting process, even though the financing terms are attractive, and instead choose a different option. The yellow, John has highlighted those given his experience, but the two downsides to FHA, they typically don't allow parity indebtedness, and so a CCRC would need to separately incorporate a separate venture to finance those programs to use HUD. If you turn to page 17, USDA, again, one of the ones in the moderate affordability component. These are fantastic programs if you are in the right geographic area. For those in major metropolitan areas, typically not accessible. But if you have a rurally located or adjacent rural allocation, and Tom will speak to this, can be very attractive. 40-year financing, very attractive rates. The current rate 3 3/8, as you can see under the benefits. And those programs have been very successful if you have the right geographic location. And with that, I think I turn it over to Tom to talk about the Wesley Commons case study.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, so as Steve mentioned, the USDA financing, there's actually kind of two key programs that people may be referencing when they reference the USDA. One is a guarantee program whereby the USDA guarantees bank debt to provide the borrower a lower rate. But the even more compelling, in our mind, structure is the Community Facilities Direct Loan Program. So rather than a guarantee being provided, the government, by way of the USDA, is actually directly funding a loan to an eligible entity. Steve mentioned the rural component. One thing that we should note is that we've run across a variety of borrowers that at first glance you would not think would qualify for the government's definition of rural, which is a metropolitan statistical area of 20,000 or less. What we found is that depending on the state and the jurisdiction, there are often, we'll call them flexible interpretations of what jurisdiction you're in. So for example, somebody that thinks they're in a 35,000 person town is actually in a 10,000 person fire district. And because of that, the community is eligible for USDA direct loan funding. So to talk about Wesley Commons a little bit, unit mix showed on page 18. It is a CCRC in Greenwood, South Carolina. Been around for a little while. We had a two-phase project we were engaged to assist them with, as shown. Phase one was just some commons renovations and the addition of a few assisted living units. The bigger phase two, and this is where the USDA came in, was about a $17.5 million replacement skilled nursing facility. So as Steve mentioned, we used an interim funding mechanism by getting the same bank that funded phase one to fund a construction loan for phase two. But as you line that up, what you also do is you line up a commitment from the USDA that upon CON receipt, you get a loan from the USDA that refinances effectively the bank's construction loan and then provides you with 40-year money at a low fixed interest rate with flexible covenants, no put risk. So you've got the advantage of bank debt where you get the drawdown feature and the low interest rate, but there's no bank sitting there in 10 years or 7 years or 12 years or whatever it may be saying, we need to renegotiate this now. It's 40-year money. Additionally, no debt service reserve fund is required. So if initially funded with a construction loan and then taken out with the USDA direct loan, you really are getting the best of both worlds that people often talk about between the certainty of fixed rate bonds but the low cost of bank debt. I think the final point I'll mention is that from an interest rate perspective, those rates are moving periodically, monthly, I believe. John can correct me, but you get two bites of the apple, so to speak. So along the process, the USDA, when you're applying, will give you what's called a letter of conditions. That will have a rate in it, and let's say that rate was 3.5%. Well, then when you get your certificate of need, of occupancy rather, we look at what the USDA rate is at that point, could be a few years later, and if the rate was 3%, lower than the 3.5% that I mentioned earlier, your rate would now be 3% for 40 years. But if by chance it was higher, let's say it was 4% at the certificate of occupancy threshold, you would get to retain the 3.5% that was quoted to you at the outset of the process. So just one additional advantage of the USDA program. And we've done probably a handful of these now up and down the Southeast. And while USDA funding is a little bit in question right now due to government dynamics, it's something we're keeping our eye on closely and would be happy to speak with anybody about going forward. So I'll pass it back to Steve to talk about tax credits.
Thanks. So if you switch to page 19, some quick overview facts on the tax credit program. The tax credit program has been around for decades and typically have been applied just to multifamily affordable projects. In recent years, really in the last 3 or so years, there's been a fair degree of crossover into the senior living, independent living, assisted living, memory care facilities, since those same rules apply to those types of facilities. Tax credits form a component of the capital stack, but to be eligible for tax credits, you do need to have an affordability requirement in the project, and that affordability requirement is typically 20% of the units at 50% of the area's median income. The income restriction and then an appropriate rental restriction along the HUD guidelines, typically 30% of the monthly income associated with that individual, or 40% of the units need to be reserved for individuals earning 60% of the area's median income. Most projects that have tax credits associated with them, once they've met that requirement, they end up making the entire facility affordable, since the economics driving the application of tax credits make that typically desirable. Used in conjunction with tax-exempt debt, and we'll get to the restrictions on the tax-exempt debt in a moment, but can provide all the capital needed for a project, and we'll take you through a couple of case studies. Real quick example of tax credit math for 4% tax credits. a tax credit is granted on the project basis each year for 10 years. So in a 4% credit, you take the basis of the project. Let's just say that's the cost of construction. You multiply that 4% by the cost of construction, in our case $20 million, for each year for 10 years, and then that amount is present valued back and syndicated by tax credit syndicators to folks in need of tax credits. The typical purchaser of tax credits, frankly, are banks because they get not only a credit on their income taxes, but they get CRA credit as well, which is very valuable as institutions like ourselves continue to work with the Fed to provide solid financial footing and achieve what the federal government has determined is critical for large financial institutions. There are two tax credit programs. There's the 4% program, which from our perspective we are most familiar with since it involves the use of tax-exempt debt. And then there is the gold standard, which are the 9% tax credit. Same mechanism, but obviously a much, much larger credit available. If you turn to page 20, frankly, this is just a little financial humor, but to structure a LIHTC transaction, many arrows and boxes, but the takeaway here is this industry has existed, frankly unchanged since the mid-'80s, and many institutions are very good at structuring this. This is a well-worn model, and so while many boxes to do and many papers to draft, there is significant precedent, and the transactions actually go very smoothly. If you turn to 21, we address the 9% tax credit. Tax credits are allocated by state, and each state has separate requirements in terms of how they're going to allocate those resources. And as you might imagine, 9% tax credits are extremely popular and of very limited supply. So each state has a number of requirements. We've listed on this page typical requirements for a project. Usually the mechanism is each state, through whatever authorizing entity it is assigned, ranks projects. Projects are submitted on a time schedule, and then the winners of that beauty contest are awarded those credits. The 4% credits typically have been in greater supply, and if you turn to 22, similar to the 9% structure, but like I said, typically in greater supply. And in recent past, there frankly have been an excess supply of 4% credits. A couple states have figured out the usage of these in the senior living model, assisted living, memory care, and independent living, and so certain states, including Minnesota, have gotten tight in terms of their allocation, but in most jurisdictions there are still plenty of supply. Just to reiterate the bullets on this page, a 4% credit must be used in conjunction with tax-exempt debt. At least 51% of the project has to be financed with tax-exempt debt. I have no idea why, but that is a federal requirement. The tax credit typically forms about 30% of the capital stack. So, in a classic loan environment where you would see 75% loan to value, as we had mentioned before, the tax credit provides all the equity typically needed for a project of this type. And other grants may be used and often are used in conjunction with this type of program. What we have seen in a number of examples in the adaptive reuse arena, where folks are converting existing facilities, either an old nursing home or an old hotel or an historic building of some sort, historic tax credits and new market tax credits can be used in conjunction with the low-income housing tax credits to form an even stronger financing base. If you turn to 23, just a quick example of the classic multifamily usage of LIHTC. So this project is in Louisville, Kentucky. In conjunction with both historic tax credits and low-income housing tax credits, we issued tax-exempt debt just south of $17 million. Coverage for a classic transaction like this is really, in the 125-ish range, so debt service coverage tighter than what you would typically see in a normal transaction. And the financing is negotiated in conjunction with the equity syndicator, and their requirements are similar to ours in that they size reserves and look at debt service coverage, et cetera, et cetera. But the entire capital stack was financed with those two components. If you turn to 24, 142D is a number in the federal tax code that refers to the tax-exempt debt component that is typically used in conjunction with LIHTC. I do want to make a distinction, though, between using tax-exempt debt with and without low-income housing tax credits. If tax-exempt debt is issued with low-income housing tax credits, meaning you have applied for the tax credits and plan on using them as part of the capital stack, you have two requirements, really. You have to have the proper percentage of individuals who meet that income test as part of your project on an ongoing basis. And those same individuals, you have to provide apartments or units for them at rental levels that meet the HUD requirement for that area. And like I said, that's typically 30% of their monthly income. So two things, an income restriction on the selected portion of residents associated with that project, and then a rental restriction as well. If you choose not to use LIHTC as part of your capital stack and instead have other equity sources, you still have the same income restriction, but you do not have to restrict rents. And Michelle will speak briefly on a project that we completed in Florida that used that criteria. And again, just to review, the income restriction, as outlined by the federal tax code, is 20% of the units are restricted to individuals who earn less than 50% of area median income, or 40% of the units are restricted for those individuals who earn less than 60% of the median income. An important note in the next bullet, assets are not considered. Income from those assets are considered, but the assets themselves are not considered to determine whether an individual qualifies. So if an individual has moved all its assets to a trust and receives just the income from the trust, or if they have dispersed those to family members and family members are supporting that individual, you may have the opportunity to have relatively high income individuals or high net worth individuals, but because of the restrictions still qualify as meeting that test. I'm now going to turn it over to Michelle to talk about a couple of case studies where we've enacted these financing structures.
Hey, Steve, this is John. Before I can just interrupt just for a second, I think one of the key takeaways here, especially with this 142D program, is we talk about how the rental product is going to continue to, I think, get greater market share of the retirement housing stock that is available. So I think you're going to have more and more rental and less entrance fee. That doesn't mean that the entrance fee product isn't going to be relevant. It'll still be relevant, but it'll be a smaller percentage of the market share relative to the entire retirement housing stock going forward, and rental is going to continue to grow at a faster rate. And one of the reasons for that, this 142D program that Steve talked about, is a way for for-profit developers to access tax-exempt debt. So they have access to the same inexpensive capital that you have if they meet one of these requirements. I think that's really the key takeaway here, is this has become another venue or another alternative for for-profit developers to access low-cost capital and creating additional competition to our not-for-profit clients. Michelle?
Yep, thanks, John. So on that note, if we go to page 25, this is an example of a for-profit entity accessing the tax-exempt market through the 142D financing that Steve and John have mentioned. Tapestry is a for-profit group, and they have a wealth of experience in a variety of real estate projects, including senior housing. And they've come up with a creative way to save costs and provide housing for the moderate income market. They decided to convert a former hotel into an affordable senior housing community. So for this project, which obviously is in Tallahassee, Florida, it will consist of 44 memory care units and 105 assisted living units aimed toward the affordable market. And to access the 142D tax-exempt financing, they restricted a certain percentage of their units for those earning a certain percentage of the median income. So highlights of this project include mitigation of risks. The existing shell would save costs instead of a new construction straight up from the ground, and this will help Tapestry offer an attractive and affordable senior housing product to those in the market area. On the flip side, if we go to page 26, this is an example of what we typically see in the senior housing market, which is a 501c3, but one that is not a typical entrance fee model, but a rental model. Crestview Senior Living is located in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and they have a long history of serving the moderate income senior population since the 1950s. Minnesota is known for a rental model as opposed to what we typically see, the entrance fee model. And so Crestview wanted to build a new property with 66 rental independent living units, 62 assisted, and 24 memory care. However, as BB&T examined the capital structure and some of their other entities, we decided that a new obligated group, which encompasses the new project, would be more financially viable for the long term. So with this new obligated group, it would create enough future cash flow to accomplish Crestview's objectives, and they just simply access the tax-exempt market as we typically see. So those are just two examples, one from the for-profit side and one from the not-for-profit side of accessing the tax-exempt market. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Steve on page 27.
So I'll ask John to contribute on this page as well. But what BB&T has learned as we have worked on certain of the 142D / rental model projects, especially with for-profit developers, is they're focused on really two areas. One, they really try to make the projects efficient. So we have, as Michelle had described, the Tapestry project in Florida. That developer has determined that it can save 10 to 15% of construction costs and construction time by using old hotels and rehabbing them, and that allows him to set his rents at a level below the median to attract a new facility residents much faster than he otherwise might be able to fill it up. And then secondly, and in conjunction with that, hospitality. So a number of these for-profit developers have had a long history in the hotel business, and the rental model, certainly in their minds, and I think there's some justification for it, falls more closely to a hotel model than it does a classic CCRC model, where you have relatively fast turnover and you have relatively low barriers to entry in competing facilities. So the way to attract folks is through services and attention to detail that allows you to get people in the door and keep them at your facility. And they are implementing those types of services and features in their projects. John and I had visited a project in Atlanta that speaks exactly to that. They had spent several months and several tens of thousands of dollars to work with the city to allow them to have a bar that was below the surface of the floor. That from a code perspective was difficult because that you have the potential for tripping, et cetera, and so not typically permitted from a permitting perspective. However, it allowed the bartender to be eye to eye with his customers as they sat down in regular sized chairs, so they didn't have to have bar type stools for elderly people to hop up into. again, they spent tens of thousands of dollars to get that one feature right to make sure this was an attractive place for their residents. John, comments on the other bullets on the page?
I think that's it. I mean, scale obviously goes without saying. So if you can, again, I'll go back to Givens. Now that they've got 3 of these rental communities that are financed with tax credits, it's just getting easier and easier. And so I think achieving scale is important. And that goes back to making sure you've got enough leadership, intellectual capital, sophisticated systems, and technology to operate your community going forward. So I think we can spread some of these call overhead costs to more communities. It makes sense, and that's something obviously a lot of these for-profit developers are focusing on is achieving scale, and it's something that I think our not-for-profit clients really need to focus on a little bit more going forward as well. So I think going with page 28, I'll hand it back over to Tom.
Sure, thanks, John. Before we get to 28, as it is, I'd just like to recap a little bit. So if you've taken nothing else so far from this presentation, and I know we've thrown quite a bit of information at everybody very quickly, but if you had to really digest it into maybe 2 pieces, the first is that this will be an incredible need that is developing over the next 20 years. Not to say that it doesn't exist now, but the affordable product for seniors and folks in general will be a massive need that our nation is facing soon. And 2, that there already are and hopefully will continue to be a variety of mechanisms to get these projects going once that decision is made that is desirable by various operators or developers or other interested parties. But on page 28, what you'll see are the takeaways, just jumping back to the Harvard study itself that the team that prepared that study came away with. And I won't read them to you verbatim, but I think one of the themes that you will notice on this page, and the word's not actually there, but is collaboration. I think that's something that this initiative is going to take in order to be successful. Now, that might be collaboration between, for example, the government and the private sector, where the government is, just as an example, allowing for the rezoning of certain land so that it could be used for these purposes, whereas currently it may not be. And then the private sector capitalizing on that government action and bringing a project or projects into fruition. It may be collaboration between various industries. The third bullet down, you see healthcare and housing, kind of 2 separate but related industries as we sit here today. Obviously, there's been collaboration in the past, and I think we're going to need to continue to see that in order for these types of entities to really start to flourish. Or it could be between education, whether it be higher education institutions or organizations like Leading Age, educating their constituencies or their students or their future residents about the market and what it may take to financially handle becoming a resident at one of these places. So I'll just give it to John and kick it to John and the rest of the team to highlight anything else that's on their mind.
Yeah, and a lot of this education is consumer related. I mean, there are, as we all know, we've got relatives. What do you do for a living? We finance life plan communities. Well, what's that? So there's a lot of ignorance in the market about retirement options, quite frankly. And so the more we can do to make people aware of their housing options and what might be available, and that'll come through, I think, continued advocacy from organizations like Leading Age of Georgia, et cetera. And then also, I think a big takeaway is rental. I think we're going to see more rental options out there than ever before. Again, as I mentioned earlier, that doesn't mean that entrance fee doesn't remain relevant and an option, but I think you're going to see more and more of the age cohort that's getting into that retirement age now really want more choice and flexibility, and rental serves that purpose. Steve, Michelle, did you want to add any closing comments before I hand it back over to Jackie?
No, I think you
Okay.
covered it, Tom. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Steve. Jackie, we'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I do have just a few questions that come to mind. I have to say, first and foremost, this is an exceptional digest of really high-level and pertinent information. And as I was just thinking through in some of the conversations we've been having with Leading Age Georgia members, or, looking at the current landscape, what's the current rate of demand for the traditional model? And as we see this change, what are you all seeing as, is there going to be a significant shift and decline in that traditional model where maybe it's 10, 15% of the population of elders that are gravitating to the life plan community? And will the boomers, really ignite change, and they want that same level of hospitality, but they're not going to be willing to buy and purchase that experience at the same rate? What are you hearing and seeing?
So this is really going to be not backed up by empirical evidence, Jackie. This is, just going around the country, having been doing this for 30 years and just talking to architects, talking to consultants, talking to other bankers, and a lot of providers that are doing some creative things out there. My read on this, and again, it's not backed by empirical evidence at this point, and we all go to these conferences where they talk about how we're going to have this aging population. As a result of that, we're going to need all of these additional retirement housing units, and they kind of talk about in the classic sense of life plan communities. And I think that's a little bit misleading because all of this growth that's necessary is not going to be met by life plan communities. It's going to be met by other alternative housing models. I do believe that given there's an intersection here between the need for additional retirement housing stock and also a culture change. And I think what's happening here is you are going to continue to see a need for what I call the traditional CCRC or life plan community. I mean, that's going to grow. Is it going to grow at a rate that's going to keep track with the need? Absolutely not. So it's going to remain relevant. It's going to remain a choice. I think what's going to pick up that slack is really going to be the rental product. And one of the reasons for that is that this is where the culture part comes in. I think that when you're getting into the front of the baby boomers right now, I'm on the tail end, we're not going to live in a traditional campus-style life plan community. We're going to want to live somewhere where there's more intergenerational connectedness and more community connectedness. So I think where you're going to see a lot of growth is in what I call more of these urban style, we call it a campus if you want, where your choices may not be to eat at your community every day, having other dining options, being able to have places close enough to your community that you can walk to that give you that variety and that sense of connectedness to the larger community as well. So that's just kind of my feel where this industry is going. Will our existing life plan communities go out of business? Absolutely not. There's still going to be a need for them. But when you look at the real growth, it's really going to come from these other retirement housing options.
Excellent. Well, I have just another caveat to that, and because we've been exploring the neurodiverse continuum of care models, as we're seeing not only the growth in the aging population for those who are typically active aging adults, but those that are living with developmental disabilities aging in place. And as their caregivers are aging into senior living, we are finding that many of our long-term care communities and CCRCs and life plan communities are also looking at the neurodiverse continuum model. Any words on that in terms of financial structuring? Is that our future? Should Leading Age be exploring this?
Does anybody else want to take that before I take a shot at it or try to? All right. I think that's going to be a very small part of it. Jackie, some of our clients are looking at that as well. I think where that, especially in the lower income side. I mean, I'm a board member of a adult daycare organization that works with mentally and physically impaired individuals, most of whom are over 65. And the way that's kind of working right now is through adult daycare, and it's desperately needed in our society, and there are people that are doing that right now that do a really good job of it. I think that at least the communities that I've talked to that are thinking about getting into that area have kind of, I don't want to say fallen into it, that they've just got enough residents that have relatives that need help that they're kind of looking to do that, and can they really make that more significant part of what they do as part of their mission. And I think it would be great if more of our communities do that. Does it work? Does it fit with their core model? I think that's going to be the question.
Sure. Well, fantastic. Well, thank you all for this opportunity. I do want to share some follow-up information. If any of you have questions out there, if you will contact Tom Bowden, and that's TBOWDEN at BB&TTCM.com, or dial him at 804-727-3435. I'll repeat that, 804-727-3435. And I'm just going to wrap up and say, please go out and re-listen to this broadcast, because it will be available. We will post it in our upcoming May issue of the Coffee Break, and you can always access that on our website at www.leadingagega.org. Click on the tab and link for newsletters, and you can access those archived newsletters as well as check out the May issue of this particular broadcast. Any other questions that you all may have, and are there any last parting comments from our speakers?
Jackie, just wanted to reiterate our thanks to you, the Leading Age team, and to my colleagues for their time today, and most importantly to all the listeners out there. This is something that is very much front of mind for us, and we get around and we like talking about it, and we'd love to talk to you about it. So if you have any questions or just want to keep a conversation going, please let us know, and we'd be happy to chat. And thanks again.
Thanks, everyone, and have a fantastic day. Bye for now.
Thank you.